Hello and welcome. Now, my name is Prof. Peter Shepherd, and I have had about 5 decades of research and development into a particular assessment tool called the Credo Personality Profile, which we'll look at in a minute. But interestingly, I first became interested in this idea of assessing people, profiling them, when I applied for a job and I had to sit through a battery of 4 hours of testing. Later, I then joined up with a team of psychologists and entered into recruitment and selection, what we actually used to call headhunting, executive selection. And we as a team used a wide range of assessment tools. But what struck me the most was the concept of personality and how we each all have our own unique personality. It's a bit like we could say our thumbprint, which is unique. And so our thumbprint is like our personality. And so let me give you a bit of background. You'll see here that the Credo Personality Profiling System, or CPP, all the traits are divided into 6 clusters. And the important part here would be the orientation, if you like, of how we behave, what our preferences are for types of behavior, and whether we are more inclined to use our left hemisphere, left brain. So on this chart, it's the blue and the green. Or whether we tend to be more labeling ourselves as right brain, the yellow and the red. But also we have a thinking self, a cognitive self, which are the top 3 colors, and then our emotional self. So our brain comprises an emotional self, a thinking self, and then the other elements. So then a big aha came. We had developed this tool, which was that hybrid, incorporating the best of the big 5, 16PF, CATL, and so on. And I attended a conference in Canada on split brain technology. Now that sounded very technical and fascinating, which it was. And what happened was there was a breakthrough attributed initially to again, a neurosurgeon who had looked at the evolution of the human brain. And the idea is that we have 3 layers, and that initially we have what we might call the reptilian brain, extension of our spinal cord. It's our instinctive brain. We don't have any control over it. It just happens. Now, then there's a next outer layer called the emotional brain, the limbic system. And this is very powerful. While it's only about 10% of the mass of our brain, it's turbocharged. And then the third outer layer, about 80% of the cerebral cortex, is what is often called our thinking self, our thinking brain. It's our cognitive brain. Now, this was the 3 brains in one, so it became labeled as the triune brain. But at this conference, Dr. Roger Sperry, who is a Nobel Prize winner in medical physiology, had been doing experiments on epileptic patients. Now, in those days, and this is back in the early 70s, there was no drug for epilepsy. And so severe cases, they found they had to separate, to split literally the brain surgically. And then As a result of these experiments, they suddenly discovered that there's a whole range of behaviors that are influenced from the left hemisphere and another range that are influenced from the right. And they were able to identify these because they had been isolated. Now, for you and I in our normal working day, our brains are not split. And we're iterating, the left and the right hemispheres iterating incredibly high speed all of the time, almost simultaneously. But the research did pinpoint that we have certain areas which lead to certain functions. So with the introduction of neuroscience and a fuller understanding of the brain, its physiology, its anatomy, the biology and the biological self came into being. And so a further breakthrough was when someone called Ned Herman, who used to work with General Electric, imported a technology from Germany where you could actually have electrodes planted like on your scalp. And he would give simple tests, pencil and paper tests. And so a person would be adding up some numbers, maybe even singing a song, drawing a picture. And he was able to identify and pinpoint those precise parts of the brain, which led to those, what we might call behavioral preferences. And so what we then did is take all of these, having fitted them into the different segments of the brain, which I talked about earlier, the 6 parts, and have the tool digitized. So digitalization was really the core of this. And unique features then became the elements of those traits that we have, that we could define into talent or natural aptitudes, plus also temperament, our temperamental qualities. When we talk about temperament, it's how we react to things. You know, the classic example would be whether we're more extroverted, outgoing, social, or introverted, more conservative, more indrawn, withdrawn, and so on. And so this is our temperament. But another very important part is from especially the limbic brain, the emotional brain, what drives us, our motivational drives. And so we've been able to identify a set of these 3. So what we call our aptitudes or natural talents, then our temperament, and then our motivational drives. And having put these all into a digitized version. And so that gives us something I think that is very unique, because it's based on brain physiology, not psychology. And we've learned through neuroscience and especially behavioral genetics. Remember, my origin was actually a behavioral scientist, but I actually was a geneticist working in the animal world before the human world, where I was studying animal health and so on. But what we found, of course, is that those traits that are very strongly embedded in us, that don't change, have a strong genetic basis, a predisposition. And so that's useful to know. And so I give a quick example that if you have young children and they're very outgoing, extroverted, happy-go-lucky, or maybe very talkative, they'll grow up pretty much the same way. So you're not going to have a very talkative child suddenly becoming a very quiet, withdrawn, introverted adult. And so we now know that traits tend to be stable after, our puberty and into our late teens and perhaps even early 20s. It is still a mixture of nature and nurture. but the nature is there and it will stay there, and it's there for the rest of our lives. And so the tool becomes a very predictable way of assessing people's potential behavior and therefore how they are best fitted to a particular type of job or career, or interestingly enough, even how they may get on better with one type of person than another. And so these are the unique features that we find organizations can use when they're recruiting people to fit them into the right job. So as we say, we want square pegs in square holes. We don't want square pegs in round holes. So good job sort of personality trait match or fit, if you will. And so this tool is incredibly useful, not only for an individual to help understand themselves, but that might be the employee, but an employer in making sure that that person is steered in the right direction, that they are going on a career path that suits their personality. Because careers can change, jobs can change, but personalities don't. So I hope you found this useful and interesting. And it was a pleasure sharing some of the background with you. Thank you for listening.